Right on.
It wasn't too long ago that somebody came out with all the investing tips you needed on a 3x5 card. And here it is. I'll give you a chance to look at it a little bit. It was really very well done. And for the most part, I agree with it wholeheartedly. Although I think I appropriately should give you the Dr. Chuck version that will be a little bit more detailed. The place I like to start and eliminate a lot of confusion, it's always right there, right at the beginning, and my students invariably confuse shelters versus vehicles, meaning types of accounts and what you place in those accounts. Meaning they say, well, I'm going to invest in a IRA account or bonds. Well, wait a minute. You invest in bonds through an IRA account, if you see what I mean. Specifically, a shelter is a type of an account. It can be a personal cash account, meaning fully taxable, realized right now. A deferred account, that's like a pension plan or a traditional IRA account, not redundant, look it up. And then there is the Roth tax-free. We'll see also there's some others like an SEP and a 529, a medical accounts. Then there are what you place in those accounts, which consist typically of stocks, bonds, ETFs. Those are exchange-traded funds, kind of new. They're mutual funds that trade as and like stocks. And then, of course, there are mutual funds. Here again are the types of accounts, shelters, if you will, where you place your investments. Your personal cash account, generally fully taxable right now. We'll find there are some tax advantages that are unique only in a personal cash account. Then there's deferred accounts. I group them together. We'll see there's pension funds, the 401k. I used to make the joke about the latest crash turned it into a 201k. And then a 403b, that's the educational version. And these should be thought similarly as a traditional IRA account, which is also deferred. Then there's a Roth IRA account. And the reason it's not redundant, the A stands for arrangement. And these are fully tax-free. No tax benefit going in, no tax obligation going out. And there's a lot of gurus out there. Ed Slott comes to mind. It always has those as a preferred vehicle. I'm going to show you that's not always correct. Then there are SEPs, those for people who are self-employed. I'm going to leave that to those who are self-employed because that's, well, part of their job. And secondly, there's some unique accounting obligations there. Then there's a 529 and medical accounts. Those are respectively for student college educations. And if, particularly in the case of medical, appropriate for those who have chronic tax deferred benefits to setting aside tax-free monies to handle regular medical care. Recently, those have become no longer use it or lose it, so they do carry over. The 529s for the college funds, a lot of gurus say, save that for the end, invest in yourself first. You know, Johnny or Mary may not wind up going to school, let alone in your own state. They're actually not that large. Let's save those for last. You'll notice on that 3x5 card, as well as most investment gurus will say, yeah, pay off those credit cards. And indeed, at some 18 compounded, making almost 20% a year, taxable equivalent basis, a time and a half again. You know what? Here's a picture. 10 cents, the first Superman comic, Action Comic #1, sold for a dime. A couple of years ago, sold for $10 million. Across 80 years, believe it or not, that was the same compound annual rate of return, a taxable equivalent basis, had you paid off your credit card. And, of course, there's one big difference. The stock market, let alone investing in comic books, is risky and not certain. Paying off your credit card is certain. So let's start there. Pay off those credit cards. A lot of people like to say they want to learn how to get rich quickly. Well, one of 3 ways I think you can do that is 1, you're lucky, you're born into it, win the lottery. Yeah, right. 2, you work 80 hours a week. Boy, that's tiring. 3, you're a liar and a cheat. I'll save those for the telemarketers who still don't have a clue. I took courses in geography, astronomy, got A's, and I still to this day can name only one or two constellations, and all the capitals and the flags I learned on my own. In investments, we're going to learn you get rich slowly but surely across time. Look at this graphic. If you start at the age of 20 instead of 30, going to the age of 60, you double your money. If you can just save 2% a year, we're going to show that by using no-load mutual funds with low expense ratio ETFs, maybe gaining 2% a year. Oh, but what is that? Across 40 years? Turns out to be another 100% compounded. So if you can double it and double it again, you've made 4 times as much in 40 years, starting early, not being conned by the brokers who do what? Make you broker. One of the very first tips I start off with is I suggest learn to do your own taxes. Good grief, you learn it once, you learn it forever. You just keep track of the new rules that apply to you, and the software makes it a lot easier. And another reason is you're going to have those same set of papers for your retirement plans, investing, and taxes all at the same time, and we're going to find out it's advantageous to do them together. We'll look at that later. And you might want to, first of all, be aware of what tax bracket you're in, and don't go the easy route. You actually want to really do a thorough tax filing, which begins with, in particular, deducting your state income taxes from your federal income tax. I'm using California. It applies to a lot of large states. And sure enough, that saves you a little bit, which also allows the convenience that we can round for most middle-class payers to almost exactly 1/3 as your marginal income tax rate for both federal and state combined after that deduction. And speaking of taxes, you're going to be better at this than any tax twit who's sitting there typing the same stuff in the computer that you can do, is that the traditional IRA accounts, you generally want to max those out, along with your pension plans, and you want to max those out. And the pension plans, many times the employers are going to match it, and that's free money. And regardless whether it's a employer pension plan or a traditional IRA account, these are deferred accounts. You take the tax deduction up front, you pay the taxes later, and generally those are meant for people in smaller incomes if they do have a qualified pension plan. Again, that's why you learn to do your own taxes. You'll see the box is checked as to whether you have a qualified pension plan. And the Roth IRAs, no tax going in and out, have greater limits in terms of qualification. I have here the 2017 rules, and that's part of the tax rules in terms of allowing you to create these two types of IRA accounts. Some so-called investment gurus always say go for tax-free, and I'm going to show you that's wrong in a very simple illustration. And clearly it's a function of tax brackets. And let's say you have cash coming back in at time T, you put it in at time 0, and you can do it either Roth, no consequences going either way, versus a traditional IRA, and it's after tax, so you get the portion that's left over. And remember, for Californians, let's say middle bracket, you get the 2/3 going in and out left over. And, well, wait a minute. If the tax brackets going in and out are in the same state, or you're in the same state of having the same amount of income and tax level brackets, then they cancel, and it really doesn't matter in terms of rate of return. Likewise, left out of the discussion many times, is the reverse, is that with a Roth, you get full 3/3 instead of 2/3. So that means you put aside, let's say, not $4,000, but $6,000. So with a Roth, you actually put aside 50% more. That's something to think about. And here are the states that have the highest state income tax brackets. And here are the states that have the lowest or no income tax brackets. So if indeed you wind up retiring in a state, often very likely the case, that has no income tax, you would actually be better off with a traditional IRA instead of a Roth non-taxable IRA. Again, with the caveat, with a Roth, you do have 50% more going in and out because you get the full 3/3 instead of the 2/3. Say 4,000 versus 6,000. And here I'm using an approximation of, say, 4,000, 6,000 traditional versus Roth IRA, when in fact it's currently 5,500. Unless you're over 50, it's called the catch-up rule, where you actually get 6,500. And moreover, by the time you get around to doing this, you may actually face different brackets, different amounts in terms of the qualification. They do change them every couple of years. Okay, now where do you put what and what amounts? First, think of all of your accounts together, retirement and your IRAs and your cash and your home as a group, a portfolio. And here's a tip a lot of people agree with. Take your age as a percent and make that the amount you put into low-risk investing. ETFs, exchange-traded funds, mutual funds, low expense ratio, and low zero load charges, and in particular, target-dated funds. They become less risky as you approach the age in question. You might stagger those if you think about it. And that's because regular bond funds still are risky with interest rate changes, whereas with target-dated funds, they go to the maturity that you name and become less risky when you approach that date. And as you get older, you increase that proportion that you've set aside to your low-risk funds. You can increase the percentage a little bit up or down as a proportion to your age as a percentage, depending on whether you want to eat well or sleep well. And you reapportion the remaining amounts equally, being diversified, into, say, global, growth, and index funds. I'm not a fan of real estate funds in that have some tax and otherwise return problems. And also, you probably own your own home. Remember, thinking of the whole portfolio that is all your investing. I like to point out that sometimes at, say, the occasional meet and greet or cocktail party after a few, someone will say, well, give me a stock tip. And I'll say, half jokingly, buy low, sell high, haha. Wait a minute. I'm serious. Look, here's the example we just did, except I've noted that the two pieces that should be equally diversified, one is gained, one is decreased. And I note that all we want to do is diversify, rebalance. And we're going to increase the one that shrank, decrease the one that has grown. And did you just notice that meant you sold the one that went up, you bought the one that went down, and you did indeed buy low and sell high, but not for purposes of timing, trying to beat the market, but all you're trying to do is continue to rebalance, to diversify. Here's about as good a place as any to deal with some Wall Street folklore, or as I like to think of it, as folly. Two things, dollar cost averaging and reinvesting those dividends. Dollar cost averaging makes the argument that if you're putting in regular amounts of funds, which you normally do anyhow in most retirement plans, that you benefit from buying more shares at lower prices than you do buying fewer shares at higher prices. And of course, that's tautologically true. And a good simulation, I have a video on this elsewhere, shows that in fact, properly done, it's a wash. Secondly, reinvesting those dividends. Sounds like a pretty good idea until you think about, boy, does that confound the taxes. Secondly, you're not diversifying. And thirdly, for those of you who might be interested in writing covered calls, that's a conservative practice that you wind up having oddball amounts in other than units of 100, which makes that difficult. So I'm not entranced with either of these so-called pieces of Wall Street folklore, or as I call it, folly. Somewhere in here, and often neglected, is Social Security. And I know a lot of folks who think, well, gee, I'll get more Social Security if I wait from, say, current limits of age 66 to, say, 70, 72. That's nominally true. And I've shown separately in a published paper that that makes no sense. Past a discount rate of 5%, there is no scenario whatsoever, even living past 100, in which you benefit by postponing your Social Security benefits past the age of 66. That's something to think about in terms of investing and tips from Dr. C.